evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of Live Myths tonight. A little bit of a special treat. Well, I hope it's a special treat for you. It's a special treat for me. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Dagda. Or if you put the H's in there, the pronunciation might be Dagda. And we're going to explore Dagda. Dagda is very important here in the Boyne Valley. Because he is associated with Newgrange being the first owner of Sheedenbroga in some threads of myth, and being the builder in some threads of myth. Like the old Star Wars mug, I am your father. That is very appropriate for tonight's topic. So, before we get launched in, I should say that I've been doing these live myth broadcasts as a means of distracting us from the COVID-19 situation. A lot of people in different countries are in either lockdown or semi-lockdown. Here in Ireland, we're in semi-lockdown. We're not quite in full lockdown yet. There's a lot of fear and anxiety and negativity around it, and a lot of worry, and that's understandable. But while we are, some of us, restricted in our movements, maybe it would be nice to delve into some storytelling and Irish myths and legends. So first of all tonight, I'm going to tell you about Dagda or Dagda from Daithí Ó Hógán's work, because that gives us a wonderful introduction to him. And then I'm going to read, at least in part, an article or a chapter from this wonderful book, which is Harp Club and Cauldron, A Harvest of Knowledge, a curated anthology of scholarship, lore and creativity on the Dagda in Irish tradition. And you might recognise that name. The chapter's title is The Dagda and Cosmology in the Early Stories of Brew, and you might recognise the author there, a certain Anthony Murphy. But anyway, let's get started with Dagda, or if you prefer, Dagda. A leading mythic character in the Irish literature, one of the Tuatha Dé Danann, who was demonstrably the principal deity in ancient times. He is usually referred to with the definitive article, namely on Dagda, the Dagda. The name, earlier Dagdae, D-A-G-D-A-E, derives from a Celtic dago dewios. The second element in that Celtic designation, literally sky, was cognate with other Indo-European terms for the male sky deity. For example, Indic Dios, Latin Deus, Greek Zeus. The first element in the designation meant good, and thus the real meaning of his name was good God. Though not good specifically in the moral sense, but rather in the sense of technical precision. This explanation is given in the important text on the Second Battle of Moytura, and of course we've already discussed the Second Battle of Moytura, and we will come back to it because there's loads and loads of stuff in there, but specifically the coming of Lu and Nuadu vacating the seat at Tara for 13 days. When the Tuatha Dé Danann were making their military preparations. From the surviving portrayals, he can be identified with the father god whom Caesar claimed was regarded by the Gauls as their ancestral deity. Medieval texts, in fact, state that the Dagda had the alternative name Yochi Olahar, the sobriquet meaning here father of many. He was also known by appellations indicating blazing brightness, such as A. Allan, fiery lustrous one, and A. Rua Rohasa. I'm trying to get the pronunciations right. This suggests his identification with the sun rather than the sky, and it seems that an earlier indigenous sun cult influenced the image of the sky deity among the Western Celts. References to the Dagda under such names portray him as an ancestral figure distinguished by great wisdom. The Dagda was said to have had his residence at Brew, the tumulus at Newgrange, on the bank of the River Boyne in County Meath. This is in fact a great Stone Age passage tomb dating to the 3rd millennium BC, through the long passage of which the sun shines at winter solstice, and we'll be talking about that momentarily. It is obvious that the archaic people who built the site placed great emphasis on social renewal by the sun. When Celtic culture reached the area, it was therefore natural that the Celtic sun god be domiciled there. A frequent theme in the old literature is that Brew was the residence of the Dagda. In that role, he is described as the father of the youth deity Angus, having caused the sun to stop for 9 months so that the youth could be conceived and born discreetly. When Angus grew up, however, he tricked the Dagda out of possession by a verbal trick. I think I'll stick to Dagda because that's the one I prefer. He borrowed the residence for a night and a day and then claimed that all eternity was encompassed by counting time in this way. The verbal trick played on the father deity appears to have been a medieval dramatisation of early lore. According to this lore of the Druids, time was composed of darkness for the dead and light for the living. See Dun and Fionn, and the father deity relinquished his control over the affairs of the living to the presiding king. Some basic attributes of the Dagda are described in the account of the Second Battle of Moytura. These attributes are hugeness, generosity, and a voracious appetite. He particularly liked porridge. He possessed a mighty cauldron from which no company ever went away unsatisfied, and the narrative again and again stresses the massive and momentous nature of his imagery. He is represented as willingly building a fortress for King Bress. We spoke about Bress also, and then being forced to build a great rampart around that fortress. During his work, he was deprived of food due to the demands of the satirist Cruidenvale, and his life was miserable. However, through the advice of his son, Macog, i.e. Angus, he outwitted both Cruidenvale and Bress, and chose as payment for his work a single black heifer from Brass's herd. And we went over that. We've discussed that one already. The images of progenitor and gourmand also surface in the Moytura text. Before the battle, we are told, he went to a tryst with the Mór Riagan. Now, we will be talking about Mór Riagan, Morrigu, in one of the live broadcasts in the coming week. Goddess of land and of war, and on the bank of the river Unshin in Connacht. She had one foot on either side of the river when the Dagda mated with her there. Then he went to a parley at the Favora camp, and they, knowing that he loved porridge, filled a great cauldron with it for him, and added vast quantities of milk and meat. They poured all this mixture into a hole in the ground and forced him to eat it. He took his ladle, which was big enough for a man and a woman to lie together in, and ate the whole meal, scraping up even the gravel in the process. Francis Smith says, thanks for your good work. Good evening to you, Francis. Jacqueline Knight is saying, thank you for enjoying these from lockdown in Spain. Well, it's very good to have you along, and hopefully we're keeping your spirits up. His belly was greatly distended as a result, and he fell asleep. On awakening, he left the camp, dragging his mighty club after him. The club was so massive that 8 men would be required to carry it. He had it mounted on wheels, and as he dragged it along, the wheels made a track as deep as a dike between provinces. He soon met a beautiful young woman of the Favora and sought intercourse with her, but his huge belly made this impossible. The woman mocked him and flung him to the ground, and after he had disgorged himself, he mated with her. She then promised magical assistance to the Tuatha Dé in the forthcoming battle, as the Mór Riagan he had also promised. When the battle was joined, the Dagda wrought havoc on the foe with his mighty club. I don't want to read it all. I'm just trying to see the more relevant parts, I suppose. Traits of the Dagda mentioned in the literature include cunning, sternness, and strength. And Margaret Ring is in. Hello, Margaret. Good evening to you. Although often thought of as a ponderous personage, adjectives such as Dian and Desh, indicating swiftness, are also coupled with the name of the Dagda. Like other deities, for example, this would suggest that he was able to make himself available without delay to his devotees. His great cauldron, which is claimed to have been brought into Ireland from abroad by the Tuatha Dé Danann, may in origin have been connected with his solar imagery. And of course his solar imagery is very important to his story, which we will get onto in my chapter coming soon. Interestingly, he is also referred to as Dagda Dun. The epithet here can be taken to mean swarthy, but it also echoes the father deity's guise as Dun. Esther Gugisberg is watching. Hello, Esther. Welcome back. Christine O'Brien. These guys were giants. Yes, they were in one respect. Although an ancestral and therefore original figure, the medieval writers were very keen to attribute a genealogy to the Dagda. which they did. Several Tuatha Dé worthies were said to have been children of the Dagda, including Acuive, Kermage, and Bridget, and one source even goes as far as to make Dian Cecht his son. An account of a daughter called Oinge states that the Dagda made a tub for her that would drip while the sea was in flood and become stable while the sea subsided. Fascinating. So if you want to learn more about the Dagda, here's a very good starting place, the lore of Ireland. David Moyler says hello from Ohio. Good evening, well, good afternoon to you, David. And Richard O'Neill says hello all. Hello to you, Richard. Very good of you to join us. So again, I'm going to read now from Harp, Club and Cauldron. This is an excellent book about the Dagda, and it's all about the Dagda. So this features scholarly articles from numerous scholars and writers. I'll just read some of the names. Laura O'Brien, Morpheus Ravenna, Isolde O'Volcon Carmody, Morgan Daimler is in there several times, Chris Thompson, Steve Davis, the archaeologist, is in there. There's artwork by Jane Brightson, John O'Sullivan, Anne Geraghty Smith, Orla Costello. There's tons of stuff. Anyway, that's worth getting your hands on if you're interested in the Dagda. This is actually reasonably new, 2018 or 2019. It's very new, yeah. Published by Eel and Otter Press in 2018. So get yourself a copy of that if you're really interested. Anyway, here's a lovely artwork that I was sent with my copy after I had submitted the following, which I'm going to read to you, and I hope you like it. Lee Trabal, I appreciate you easing our minds. Well, hopefully that's what's happening. Rhys MacPhail Semanco. Gura Mahagut Agus Bianacht Ort. Hello from Alba. Can't see that. And I'm not going to touch the phone because I have it sort of... I'm going to see if I can read that on the computer screen. The phone is sort of precariously situated at the moment. I haven't got a proper tripod or stand for it. I figured that using the phone for the live broadcast seemed to be working better. Let me see. Display comments by... From Alba. Oh, okay, from Scotland. What are the place names related to the Dagda? Okay, well, we'll get to that now momentarily. Philip Murray is there. I think I may have read that, did I? Hello, Philip. Anyway, as the supposed chief of the gods, Dagda occupies a supreme pedestal in the mythical story of Brew, the megalithic complex of the Bend of the Boyne. However, despite his obvious prowess, he is knocked off this pedestal and disappears into relative obscurity, which I find very interesting. He is said to have been responsible for building the great monument of Newgrange, Sheedenbroga, or Sheon Brew, and for the allocation of the various mounds, or She, to the Dé Dananns. Behold the fairy mound before your eyes. It is plain for you to see. It is a king's dwelling. It was built by the harsh Dagda. It was a shelter. It was a keep renowned for strength. And that's from the metrical Dinshanachus. The cosmology of Dagda and the Boyne monuments is fascinating and indeed somewhat convoluted. The stories differ as to who it was that was actually deposed of ownership of Sheedenbroga. The ancient stories of Newgrange include the Goal in Sheeda, which means the taking of the otherworld mound, Tuchmark Etain, the wooing of Etain, and Altram Chia Gawatar, the fosterage of the house of the two drinking vessels. What a long-winded name, but a very interesting story nonetheless. Of the three tales, only the Goal in Sheeda says that Dagda owned Sheedenbroga, and was tricked out of ownership by the great monument by his famous son Aengus Og, the youthful son whose cosmology is closely tied with the Swan constellation, and the reference there is Island of the Setting Sun by yours truly and Richard Moore. In the other tales, Tuchmark Etain and Altram Chia, Elkmar, husband of Aengus's mother Bowen, owns Sheedenbroga. So there's a little bit of a difference depending on which tale you read. One says Dagda was the owner of Newgrange, and 2 others say that Alkmaar was. There is a common thread in these 3 early tales. A supreme deity who's the owner of Sidenbroga, arguably the greatest of all the prehistoric monuments, is impeached or unseated from this position of ultimate authority. In one tale, this supreme deity is Dagda. In the other 2, it is Alkmaar. In all 3, the surrogate is Aengus Og. To further add to the confusion, in some versions, Dagda sends Alkmaar away on an errand and casts a spell on him. In his absence, Dagda slips into bed with Alkmaar's wife Bowen, and thus the child Aengus Og is conceived. The power of the spell is such that Alkmaar thinks he is only away for a single day, when in fact he has been away for 9 months, conveniently the gestation time for a human baby. In this way, Dagda can be said not just to have some sort of influence over time, but indeed over the movement of the sun. Thither came by chance the Dagda, into the house of famous Alkmaar. He fell to importuning the woman. He brought her to the birth in a single day. It was then they made the sun stand still, to the end of 9 months. Strange the tale, warming the noble ether in the roof of the perfect firmament. And I believe that's also from the Dinshanicus, and indeed it is. There is a similar story about Douth, another of the 3 great chambered cairns of the Brew complex, along with Newgrange, Sidenbroga and Nouth Cnogba. The Douth story from the Dinshanicus told how the king Bressel had brought the men of Ireland to build him a tower to reach heaven. The king's sister cast a spell on the sun to make it stand still, so there would be endless day to allow the tower to be built. John Carey, an expert on Irish mythology and cosmology, makes an interesting observation in relation to these 2 accounts of cosmological magic at Brew, and this is a quote from Carey. I am aware of no Irish legends associating the control or construction of sacred sites with the manipulation of time other than those which concern the tumuli of the Boyne Valley. It was then they made the sun stand still. This is fascinating. Dagda and Bowen are able to halt the sun in the sky. But what is actually happening here? Newgrange is famous around the world for its winter solstice alignment. On the shortest days of the year, the light of the rising sun enters the monument through a specially constructed aperture known as the roof box and penetrates deep into the interior of the monument, where it illuminates the floor of the central cruciform chamber for a period of 17 minutes. What happens on those days, centred on winter solstice, is that the sun's rising position on the southeastern horizon appears to stop, i.e. to stand still for a number of days. In fact, this is the very meaning of the word solstice, stationary sun. Dagda, who is in many instances described as a sun god, enters into the house of Alkmaar, Newgrange, and copulates with Bowen, during which union they make the sun stand still, warming the noble ether in the roof of the perfect firmament. The story about the construction of nearby Douth has similar cosmological essences. The Dinshanicus relates how, during the reign of the king, whose name is Bressal Bodibad, meaning Bressel who lacks in cattle, there was a cattle disease and only 1 bull and 7 cows were left. Bressel brings all the men of Éireann to Douth to build a tower after the likeness of the Tower of Nimrod, that they might go by it to heaven. Here's the Dinshanicus account of what happened next. His sister came to him and told him that she would stay the sun's course in the vault of heaven, so that they might have an endless day to accomplish their task. The maiden went apart to work her magic. Bressel followed her and had union with her, so that place is called Ferta Cuille, from the incest that was committed there. Night came upon them then, for the maiden's magic was spoilt. Let us go hence, say the men of Éireann, for we only pledged ourselves to spend 1 day a-making this hill, and since darkness has fallen upon our work, and night has come on, and the day is gone, let each depart to his place. Duad, darkness, shall be the name of this place forever, said the maiden. So hence are Duad and Cnogdubada named. The cognate aspects of both stories can be summed up as follows. A powerful figure, Dagda, the chief god, Bressel, the king of Ireland, has illicit sexual relations. Dagda mates with Bowen, who is Alkmaar's wife. Bressel commits incest with his sister, at a principal monument of the Brew complex, in these cases Newgrange and Douth, and the sun is made to stand still. One of the key differences is the mention in the Douth story of an endless day. What is this endless day? I have previously suggested this aspect of the Douth legend refers to the summer solstice. During the longest days of the year, when the rising and setting sun stand still on the horizon, in the northeast and northwest, the sun does not set far enough beneath the horizon for astronomical twilight to end. The result is that there is no complete darkness for a number of weeks either side of the June 21st solstice. And in fact, there is sufficient light on the longest days to enable one to work through the night hours without artificial light. Believe it or not, that is actually true. The darkness that falls upon the place, which is described as nightfall, is perhaps an allusion to a solar eclipse, when, during totality, bright day turns to dark night. A combination of factors suggests that Douth itself might have been an astronomical device in addition to any funerary function it might have had. The alignment of its southern chamber on the winter solstice, discovered by Martin Brennan and Jack Roberts in 1980 and later documented in detail by Anna Marie Moroney, is now well known. In fact, each year on the day of winter solstice, the Office of Public Works opens the chamber to the public in the afternoon to allow people to see this phenomenon. This is in stark contrast to Newgrange, where over 30,000 people apply for the winter solstice lottery to try to gain an elusive place in the chamber on one of the solstice mornings. In addition to the mythology, which suggests a sudden darkening during the longest days of the year when a male sun and female moon come together, there are other factors suggesting a more complex cosmological function for the monument. And I'm going to skip those for the moment and let you catch up when you get your copy of the book. At Newgrange, the red Dagda and Bowen make love at a time when they have caused the sun to stand still. It would appear that the mythology of the Dinshanachus is describing, in poetic imagery, the winter solstice illumination of Newgrange, during which the beam of the sun, Dagda, is seen to enter the chamber, the womb of Bowen. In the dim interior of the cavern, reflected light from the shaft of sunlight on the floor illuminates a triskel or triple spiral emblem on a chamber stone in the rear recess. Is this the emblem of the divine Neolithic Trinity, Dagda, Sun God, Bowen, Earth Mother, and Angus Og, the miracle child? And of course, there's a question mark there, because I'm just asking the question. At Douth, Bressel and his sister commit incest as the sun is halted in the sky during endless day. Pardon the dog, he's getting excited out the back. Hopefully he doesn't cause too much of a problem. Probably at summer solstice. One exciting possibility emerging from the similarities between the myths of Newgrange and Douth is that Douth may yet be found to contain a passage and chamber with an orientation towards the summer solstice sunrise or sunset. Douth is the only one of the three great monuments of Brew that has not been excavated in modern times. There was a botched excavation carried out on the cairn in the 1840s, at the time of the Great Famine, when significant damage was inflicted upon the monument. If a passage were to be discovered at some point in the future, with an orientation towards sunrise or sunset at midsummer, this would indeed be remarkable. And forgive the dog, he's rather excited. I think there's just other dogs barking. Many things are remembered in myth and indeed in folklore from misty ages of the past. Descriptions of Newgrange in local folklore before the excavation and restoration of the monument undertaken by Professor Michael J. O'Kelly and his team beginning in 1962 contained information about aspects of the monument's construction and orientation that could not have been known about in advance of this restoration work. The descriptions of the monuments or eminent places given in poetry and prose in the Dinshanachus manuscripts are veiled to a degree in esoteric language, but they're not entirely opaque to interpretive endeavours and the extrapolation of meaning. To reiterate, Dagda, sun, enters the house of Elkmar, Newgrange, and mates with Bowen while the sun is standing still. Is this not a description, in mythic and symbolic language, of the winter solstice illumination of the She or passage tomb of Newgrange? The whole monumental landscape is known as Brew or Brugnaboinge in the archaic Irish, which the metrical Dinshanachus describes in terms of a clear, shining plain and a wide road with traffic of hundreds. with Newgrange as its centrepiece. And here's a quote from the Dindshenachus. "The house of Macindog, above thy stead, a royal sod with true hospitality." A somewhat obscure and seemingly unintelligible account of heroic deeds on behalf of the Dagda at Newgrange is attested in the ancient Dindshenachus manuscripts, and will be considered here for its cosmological import. This is the story concerning a great monster called the Mata, and the dismemberment of the strange beast at a sacred stone at Newgrange, known as the Lech Ben. The Dindshenachus describes Mata as a strange beast with 140 feet and 4 heads. It is elsewhere described as a tortoise or a sea turtle that could suck down a man in armour. It was a slow-moving, sluggish creature whose killing at Brugh Macindog is shrouded in mystery and arcane language. So I'm going to skip a bit because I don't want to concentrate on the Mata too much, because I want to come back to the Mata in a later discussion. But I want to talk about the bit about the Dagda. In the early 20th century, writer Charles Squire, we read from Squire in episode 1, credited the destruction of the Mata to the Dagda, but sadly without indicating his source for this claim. And the source for this claim is Tuatha Emera, actually, the wooing of Emer. He, Dagda, did great deeds in the battle between the gods and the Fomors, and on one occasion is even said to have captured single-handed a 100-legged and 4-headed monster called Mata, dragged him to the Stone of Ben near the Boyne and killed him there. So here clearly is Dagda being attributed with killing the Mata. Hello Gordon. Gordon Stewart is watching. And Grace Jordan, I visited Newgrange first as a freshman at UCD for a psychology class. Fell in love with it. Our teacher was brilliant and I feel at home every time I return. Well, I think that's the way a lot of people feel about it. And I certainly do, although it's literally in my backyard. In Tuatha Emera, the wooing of Emer, the plain of Muirhevna is mentioned. This plain covered what is mostly modern County Louth, and would have incorporated the great monuments of Brew as it extended as far south as the River Boyne. The name Muirhevna, we are told, means from the cover of the sea, and, this is a quote, "It is from this it got its name. There was at one time a magic sea on it, with a sea turtle in it that was used to suck men down, until the Dagda came with his club of anger, and sang these words so that it ebbed away on the moment. Silence on your hollow head! Silence on your dark body, silence on your dark brow." What is this mysterious Lech Ben upon which the monster was slaughtered? Well, again, we'll come back to that. We shouldn't be at all surprised to read that it was the Dagda who killed the Mata. The mysterious sea that covered the plain of Muirhevna was made to vanish by him. One assumes this is a case of the sun drying up all the rain. Indeed, we are told it was the Dagda who was the one who, quote, performed miracles and saw to the weather and the harvest. And just want to make sure that I'm telling you where these quotes are from. And that's from Gant's Early Irish Myths and Sagas, 1981. Where was he? "He was the red man of all knowledge, whose radiance was renowned, who was king over all Éireann, sweet-sounding, radiant. Who but the skilful Dagda? You hear of none other so famous." And that's from the Metrical Dindshenachus, from Gwyn's translation of the Metrical Dindshenachus. So he's a king and skillful and very famous. The imagery is decidedly solar. One of his epithets was Jerk, meaning red eye, which is taken to mean the sun. And that's from MacKillop. It's the Oxford Dictionary of Celtic Mythology, which we keep mentioning, and you must, if you're interested at all, buy your copy of it. His killing of the Mata is told in the Dindshenachus story about Mag Muirhevna. There is a magic sea over it and an octopus therein. So we had a monster with 100 legs and 4 heads. We had a tortoise, and now we have an octopus, having a property of suction. It would suck a man in armour till he lay at the bottom of its treasure bag. The Dagda came with his mace of wrath in his hand, and plunged it down upon the octopus, and chanted these words, "Turn thy hollow head, turn thy ravening body, turn thy resorbent forehead. Avaunt, Begone! Then the magic sea retired with the octopus, and hence, maybe, the place was called Mag Morhevne. Pardon me. There is a temptation here to imagine an antediluvian origin for the myth of Morhevne. Does this passage contain some memory of very ancient events, perhaps when the ice was retreating at the end of the last ice age and the meltwaters were creating havoc? In that wise, we can certainly imagine a solar provenance for the Dagda, although the form of the Mata appears inconstant in the manuscripts. There are aspects of Irish ancient creation myths that are consistent. The Mata licked up the Boyne, causing a deprivation of water. The octopus mentioned in the Dinshenicus passage about Mag Morhevne was expelled with the receding sea, causing another deprivation of water, thereby causing to surface the plain of Morhevne. I consider these tales to be versions of a very early creation myth, one that probably, I probably should have said possibly there rather than probably, let's not be too certain about anything, that possibly predates the construction of the great megalithic monuments of the Boyne. Witzel, for instance, suggests that the motif of killing a dragon and releasing the light of the sun are old motifs that can be dated to well before 20,000 years ago. There are aspects of the Mata octopus myths that may echo a very ancient deluge that is remembered in hundreds of similar myths from diverse parts of the world. Very possibly here we have echoes of the deluge myths. The beginning stories sound like distorted memories of that hypothetical vast flood which swept over the globe at one time, sparing only a few humans, those in the foothills and the mountains. When the waters subsided, the earth seemed to rise again. Men were not witnesses of the first actual creation, so this later upthrust of peaks and plateaus above the oceanic tides might have prompted the sea myths, and that's from Philip Freund's Myths of Creation. His ability to make the sea recede marks Dagda out as a distinctly solar figure. There was a significant change in the climate in Ireland between 3600 BC and 3000 BC, which brought about colder and wetter conditions. And that's from Robert Hensey's book about Newgrange, published in 2015. Farming communities must have been placed under significant pressure by these changes. A curious and thus far unexplained aspect of passage tomb construction is that the monuments increase in size and complexity even as the climate was degenerating and agriculture becoming more difficult. Particularly, there seems to be a greater investment in passage tomb construction in parallel with the deteriorating conditions. And again, that's from Hensey. I think that book is called Newgrange First Light. And again, that's 2015. I'll give you the sources where possible. But you really have to go and get yourself a copy of this book. Oh, sorry, I'm after skipping a page here. Just got to get my act together and just make sure. Oh, no, I haven't. Okay, I've bookmarked that. Perhaps the megalithic builders of the late Neolithic constructed the greatest of their monuments, Newgrange, Nouth and Douth, in an effort to somehow appease or placate the Dagda, in order to avert an environmental catastrophe. I think this is hinted at in the Gawal in Shida, when the Tuatha Dé destroyed the corn and the milk round about the Macmilad, that's the sons of Meal, until they made the friendship of the Dagda. In other words, stay on the Dagda's good side or your harvest will fail. Certainly, the worsening conditions would have made farming more difficult for this early agrarian community. Sensing that the deteriorating climate was making growing food more challenging, one can imagine that the community would have more zealously participated, perhaps with a sense of urgency, in the building of the great cairns. The amount of labour and exertion required for this construction project was truly immense. For instance, the mean weight of the curbstones at Nouth, of which there was 127, was 5 tons each. And of course, I think since the publication of this work, myself and Ken Williams discovered that enormous henge, the new henge of Newgrange, dubbed Drone Henge, and there are lots and lots of late Neolithic structures there. So even in the late Neolithic, there was a fantastic effort and a huge amount of labour. If there was a sense that the winter sun was seen to be weakening and that as a result the weather was deteriorating and agriculture, and along with it survival, was becoming more difficult. A monument aligned towards the sun, Dagda, at its lowest ebb on winter solstice, resembles a project that would unite the community towards a goal that might help avert a climatological doomsday situation. Were the builders trying to call Dagda back to full strength? We don't know the full extent of the effects of a worsening climate, but a community dependent on agriculture would feel the pinch more acutely. Perhaps the people who inhabited the bend of the Boyne at the time began to experience something of a famine. The promise of a feast in the other world, magically prepared by the Dagda, underlines the precariousness of early agrarian life in Eastern Ireland. Dagda was said to have kept 2 pigs in Newgrange, and I've mentioned this in some of the previous broadcasts. One roasting on a spit, the other ready for slaughter, as a means perhaps of eternally satisfying hunger in the other world. And here's a quote: "There are 3 trees there perpetually bearing fruit, and an ever-living pig on the hoof, and a cooked pig, and a vessel with excellent liquor, and all of this never grows less." And of course that's a description from John Waddell, actually, quoted from Cock and Carey, the Celtic heroic age. Perhaps Dagda was worshipped as some kind of agrarian deity. According to Squire, an old Irish tract called The Choice of Names refers to him as a god of the earth. Furthermore, he had a cauldron called the Undry, in which everyone found food in proportion to his merits, and from which none went away unsatisfied. He also had a living harp. As he played upon it, the seasons came in their order, spring following winter, and summer succeeding spring, autumn coming after summer, and in its turn giving place to winter. Whatever his bounty, and all his strengths in the dealings of the Tuatha Dé Danann against the Fomorians, the Dagda is dethroned in quite a humiliating fashion by his own son Angus Og, who takes Siad and Broga from him by trickery or verbal ambiguity. When the Sidhe are being distributed by the Dagda, his son Angus is absent, and is therefore omitted. Angus comes to Brew and demands a Sidhe from his father, who tells him that there are none left. Angus petitions his father to be allowed to stay in Newgrange for a day and a night. Dagda agrees, but when the day and night have elapsed, Angus refuses to budge. He outlines his logic for this refusal. He had been granted, he claimed, day and night, and it is of days and nights that time and eternity are composed. Therefore, there was no limit to his tenure of the Sidhe. And that is quoted from Charles Squire. That's another book that you need to add to your collection immediately. Get onto abebooks.com and order your copy right now. Actually, wait till I'm finished and then order it. Such rhetoric might have satisfied the ancient poets, but for the chief deity to succumb to such pithy and insubstantial logic seems extraordinary. But perhaps these are the lengths that parents will go to appease their offspring. Indeed, Dagda had allowed Angus to be hidden from Alkmaar by being fostered at Brew with Midger. This was firmly Angus's homecoming. He had made a defiant return to the Brew, and he was here to stay. Thus, Dagda was dispossessed, and the Sidhe, passing to Angus, took his name, Brug Macindog, the palace or the mansion or the abode of the young son, or the son of the young, or as I've translated it sometimes, the son of the Virgin. And that last is from McCulloch. J.A., Celtic Mythology, 1996, Chicago. Just in case you're interested in pursuing the sources. Margaret, Anthony Woods is watching. Hello Anthony, how are you? Margaret Ring says, at Grange Stone Circle, people used to light fires to Anya on Summer Solstice Eve, asking her to ripen the crops before Lunasa. To this day, people keep on the right side of Anya. Fascinating stuff. The late scholar Sean O'Dwyn said that the story of Dagda, Boyne and Angus represented the myth of the eternal return. And of course that is a reference to Mircea Eliade, whose I've discussed that in a blog post. I wonder now, very quickly while I'm talking to you, can I put that in the comments? Sure I can. I'm going to post that as a comment, just in case you're interested in following that one up. Mythical Ireland, Newgrange and the Regeneration of Time is the name of a blog post that I wrote a few months back. Just going to post that in as a comment there now. I promise I am. If it lets me, where's paste? Okay, we'll go Control V then. There you go. Odin wrote that at the winter solstice, Dagda and Bowen mate, and overnight the young son Aengus Og is born. Aengus represents the youthful, growing sun whose power and strength develops with the length of day. When summer solstice arrives on June 21st, Aengus realises that he is no longer youthful. As the year wanes from summer to winter, Aengus Og becomes the father figure, the Dagda, the old sun god. And, inevitably, Dagda reaches the final day, winter solstice, again, and the process of alternation proceeds forever and ever. And that is alternation, not alteration. And again, that's from Odin 2011, which I imagine is In Search of the Awesome Mystery. I met Sean Odin in 2012, which was a few years before he died, and he signed a copy of it for me. I had a copy of his book, wonderful book, that, by the way, In Search of the Awesome Mystery. I just wanted to check that in fact is the book that the reference is from. So forgive me while I look that up. And it's how very lazy of me. It's not lazy, but how remiss of me. It doesn't seem to be in the list. I'm pretty sure it is anyway. The In Search of the Awesome Mystery. After his dispossession of his prized palace, the Dagda fades from the limelight. And that's from my own book about Newgrange Monument to Immortality. The Tuatha Dé Danann hold a council to elect a new ruler, but Aengus Og is not among the candidates, interestingly enough. The new leader is Bub Jarag, Bub the Red, the eldest son of the Dagda. And we will meet, because we'll probably do a whole night about it on one of these broadcasts. We will meet Bub Jarag in the story of Aislinga Aengus Og, the dream of Aengus Og, because he's the one who helps find Aengus's dream maiden, Care. But let's not spoil it. Let's keep that one under wraps for the time being. There may be aspects of the declining climatological conditions that explain why, in the mythology, the older gods in the form of Dagda, or depending on the version Elkmar, were deposed by the youthful and vital Aengus Og. It wasn't just the case that the old sun of the year had lost its strength and was being dethroned by a new, vigorous young sun. And this is a quote from, let me just check. Again, this is actually from my own, this is from Mythical Ireland, New Light on the Ancient Past. It might have been just as likely that the old sun that had been the friend of the Neolithic farmer since the early introduction of agrarian practices into Ireland was seen to be gradually waning over the centuries, and that the arrival of Aengus Og as the new owner of Sheedenbroga signified the wish of the community that the climate be turned back in their favour. Whatever happened, the zenith of the megalithic passage tomb era had arrived, and, perhaps surprisingly, passed just as quickly. The greatest of the Irish megalithic monuments, Newgrange, Nowth and Douth, were possibly among the last to be built. But the legacy of the early deities associated with Newgrange and the monuments in the literature lives on. Although much of it was written down in medieval times, there is no doubt that certain elements of the stories have a very ancient provenance. Some of the myths appear to carry with them information about aspects of the function and design of the monuments. In certain cases, the pre-excavation local folklore was to prove extraordinarily accurate in depicting details that could not easily have been known in the days before the archaeologists excavated and restored Newgrange. In particular, there were locally recorded traditions about Newgrange that were proven accurate by the excavation. One was the claim that Newgrange was once covered with white quartz, an assertion that might have seemed outlandish until Professor Michael J. O'Kelly found white quartz beneath the cairnslip material, quartz which the archaeological community tells us was likely to have been buried for about 4,000 years. The other was that the rays of the rising sun at certain times of the year enter the opening and penetrate into the central chamber. And this is before Newgrange was restored, and a long time after this could ever have been seen. I am most fascinated by the Dinshenicus passage that describes how Dagda entered the house of Alkmaar and mated with Bowen as the sun was standing still in the heavens. Here, dear reader and scholar of ancient mysteries, is contained in sublime poetic language a description of the winter solstice illumination of Sheedinbroga, written down at a time when Newgrange had collapsed and its entrance and passage were sealed off from prying eyes, and when the marvellous and awe-inspiring flooding of its cold interior with the warm golden light beams of winter sun hadn't been seen by human eyes for several millennia. Today, hundreds of thousands of people from around the globe visit Newgrange every year. One of the first sights they behold are the huge swirling spirals on the entrance curbstone. The triple spiral dominates, a symbol perhaps of the ancient divine trinity Dagda, Bowen and Aengus Og. It is indeed astounding that the monument has survived mostly intact into the modern era. But it is equally astonishing that, over 5,000 years since it was built, its oldest names and traditions have not been forgotten. Although it has had a few name changes, and is associated with many mythical and imagined events of the past, for me it remains the great Sheedinbroga, the palace of the gods, the abode of the Dagda. And you absolutely should definitely get your hands on a copy of Harp, Club and Cauldron, which is all about the Dagda. And that is my chapter. Now, before we leave, I didn't get the books out, so I'm going to have to retrieve them from the shelves. I want very briefly to mention where Dagda went to after he vacated Newgrange, and also another very interesting aspect. So just bear with me for one moment while I gather my sources. So this book here, Old Stone Monuments by J. Ferguson, is a reprint of a book that was originally called Old Stone Monuments in All Countries, Their Age and Uses by James Ferguson. And that was originally first published under the title Rude Stone Monuments by John Murray in 1872. And in here, if I can find it quickly, the Boyne. This is very important, but I haven't marked it. Sometimes I mark books and then other times I don't. Oh yeah, here we go, Mound B. By far the best known, as well as the most interesting of Irish cemeteries, is that which extends for about 2 miles east and west of the northern bank of the Boyne, about 5 miles from Drogheda. Within this space there remain, even now, some 17 sepulchral barrows, 3 of which are preeminent. They are known by the names of Knowth for the most westward one, Douth for that to the east, and about halfway between these two, that known as Newgrange. And look at that, there's an old drawing of Newgrange. Now I know people are going to say, didn't it look lovely with the trees growing out of it before the reconstruction? Yeah, but remember the trees were doing damage, and that this was it in its collapsed and forlorn state. You couldn't have visited, you couldn't have seen much of it in those days. In front of the latter, i.e. in front of Newgrange, but lower down near the river, is a smaller one, which still popularly known as that of the Dagda, and others bear names with more or less certainty. That is Mound B, the one that I've often showed you pictures of. In fact, I need to show you this. It's on the cover of my Mythical Ireland book. It's on the back cover, because if you open up the cover of Mythical Ireland, you'll see that it's actually one picture. Newgrange and Mound B, which is the Dagda's mound. This mound down along the river, which is described in the archaeological literature as a satellite mound, is in fact a very substantial mound. It's 40 metres in diameter. If it was on its own anywhere else in the country, it would be considered a substantial structure. Now there's one more thing that I must, well there's several more actually, but we'll go on all night. I just want to talk to you about some sources. No, that's not, I got the wrong there. Took out the wrong book that time. I apologise. I just want to make sure that I get this right. This might take a minute for me to find. Yeah, so this is interesting too in relation to Dagda. I'm going to read the whole lot of this. This is from T.F. O'Rahilly's Early Irish History and Mythology. This is very interesting, right? So you're all, I suppose, familiar with the story of the Salmon of Knowledge. And the Salmon of Knowledge was said to have been caught by Fennicus the Druid down at Rosnaree, at Linfake, which is located in the Dinchanicus, very close to Rosnaree. So in the bend of the Boyne, sort of at the point where it bends northwards again towards Nouth, at that bend, on the southern side of the river, there was once a place called Cletchik, and we'll talk about that because that's the place Elkmar went to after he was deposed from Brew by Aengus in the other tales. From his omniscience, the deity in salmon form was known as O Fish, the salmon of wisdom. One of the locations of this wise salmon was at Rui, Ruad's waterfall, i.e. the Falls of Assaroe, on the Erne at Ballyshannon. Being one-eyed, Gull, this salmon was known as Gull Rui, and it, as might be expected, he is identified with the all-knowing Fintan, that's Fintan Mac Borcra, another character we will devote an entire episode to. Elsewhere we read of a mythical Rua, who was drowned in the waterfall at Ballyshannon, which from him was called Rui, and who left his name also on the adjacent Sheed or otherworld hill known as She or She-Ada. Here we have the god Aed, who presided over the Sheed, identified with the Ruad who was drowned in, i.e. who in pagan belief lived beneath, the neighbouring waterfall. Another text gives Aed Olin of Esruad as one of the names of the Dagda, who was also known as Inrua Rofessa and as Yochi Olahar. And we said there earlier that he was the father of many, and we talked about him being red-eyed, which is associated with the sun. We know further that Aed was another name of the one-eyed Gol Macmorna, Finn's traditional enemy. From the foregoing evidence, it will be sufficiently obvious, without entering into more detailed or more fundamental arguments, that the all-knowing Salmon of Assaroe, Gul Esaroi, is identical at once with the all-knowing Dagda and with Gul Macmorna. Now, on to the Boyne. I am your father, father of many. Dagda is my name. The Salmon of Wisdom, as we shall see, was also associated with the river Boyne, over which the god Nuadu, otherwise called Nectan and Elkmar, presided. In an anecdote concerning Cuchulainn, we are told how he speared a salmon in the Boyne and then mutilated Elkmar, who had entered the river to oppose him. Originally, the spearing of the salmon and the wounding of Elkmar were one and the same act. Elsewhere, we read of Cuchulainn killing the salmon in Linfake. Linfake was the name of a pool in the Boyne adjoining the Sheed of Cletchik and the Sheed of the Bruig, as in Brunabonia, and it was in that pool that the Salmon of Wisdom resided. Now wait till you hear this. The Dagda is called the King of Linfake. I think that is absolutely fabulous. I don't know if that's going to focus. The Dagda is called the King of Linfake, which I think is fascinating. So there seems to be a connection between the salmon and Dagda, and of course the river. Absolutely fabulous stuff. If you want, and I know people are going to ask this, and people have asked following the previous broadcasts, where can I get information about Dagda and the deities and early Irish mythology? Again, just so that we can repeat, a very, very good place to start is James MacKillop's Oxford Dictionary of Celtic Mythology. I know it's a dictionary and it's A to Z and all the rest. It is fabulous. An absolute must-have. And then we were talking about some of the popular works. So I've mentioned Squire, Charles Squire's Celtic Mythology, published in 1912, which is a very good primer and features an awful lot of Irish mythology because there isn't really that much else. But I also want to mention a few others. There is also Thomas Rolleston, Somebody else mentioned this after the other night, and I forgot to give it a mention. Thomas Rolliston's Celtic Myths and Legends. Now, there's no information, I don't think, about when this was published. But again, this is available as a popular modern reprint. This is another very, very good book. This one's a beauty. Ancient Irish Tales. And that's by Cross and Slover. Tom Pete Cross and Clark Harris Slover. Originally published in 1936. So, Tales of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Book of Invasions, the Battle of Moytura, the Fate of the Children of Tiryn, the Wooing of Etain, and the Destruction of Dagda's Hostel, which is another one we might talk about in time. And then the Ulster Cycle, containing probably almost all of the Tonbo Cúilge and perhaps the Wooing of Emer. Yes, the Wooing of Emer is there. The Cycle of Finn, Oisin and their companions, and then the Tales of the Traditional Kings. A fabulous work. You can probably get that second hand on the internet on somewhere like Abe Books or on some of the Amazon resellers second hand for very reasonable price. Absolutely brilliant. Okay. There are more. We'll get to them. We'll get to them as we discuss. You know, further deities. One of the principal sources for Tuatha Dé Danann mythology is Leabhar Gabhála, the Book of the Takings of Ireland, or commonly called the Book of Invasions. Volumes of which are available as reprints from the Irish Text Society. They're not cheap, they're expensive. That's volume 5. I just want to make sure that I give you the correct volume. No, that's not the one. Yeah, there we go. The Tuatha Dé Danann, section 4. So you're looking for Leabhar Gabhála Éireann, the Book of the Taking of Ireland, part 4. Edited and translated by R.A.S. McAllister. And beautifully bound in this Irish Text Society volume. Okay. And also the Metrical Dinshenachus translated by Edward Gwynn. Now, I don't have the books here, but I have them on order. Believe it or not, I've only had photocopies because, you know, they're expensive to get. So I'm actually getting the Dinshenachus. I'm expecting 3 volumes of it to arrive this week. I think it's volume 5 or 6 there, which is the index. So these are some of the sources for myths about the Dagda. There's loads of stuff online as well. Just with regards to the online stuff, just always be careful about what the sources are, you know, because if you're reading translations or, let's say, summaries of Irish mythology online, and they're not telling you what the source is, just be very, very careful with that. Just be careful that the sources that you're getting it from is looking at the original manuscripts. Anyway, I'd be very happy to take questions, and just while I'm listening or waiting for that, I'm just making sure. I mean, there's tons of popular works about Irish mythology. For instance, there's another one, The Story of the Irish Race by Seamus McManus, which is a good sort of retelling of some of the old stories. Probably more than I could tell. A very, very, very scholarly work on the Tuatha Dé Danann in general, which I've been slowly getting through lately, is Ireland's Immortals, A History of the Gods of Irish Myth by Mark Williams. Extremely scholarly, brilliantly put together, a brilliant exploration of the stories and where they might have come from. Of course, because it's a scholarly work, it has a bibliography that extends to maybe 25 or 30 pages. So that tells you how comprehensive it is. So that's a more scholarly work on the Dagda. If you're just purely interested in the Dagda and wanted to buy one book, I would highly recommend Harp Club and Cauldron, because it's a very good place to start. And I believe that all of the chapters in there are all very well referenced. Margaret Ring is asking about the Pleiades. What's that about? Sorry, Margaret, I'm not following. the Pleiades, your thoughts. What was the question? Sorry, Margaret, you might have to repeat that for me. I'm just making sure that I'm not missing anything else that's really important to the story of Dagda. Oh yeah, that's actually another copy of Rolleston. Oh yeah. I was forgetting completely, of course, that we've been referencing Lady Gregory's Complete Irish Mythology. I told you I have 3 copies of this. Gods and Fighting Men. So if I look in the index, Gods and Fighting Men and Cuchulainn of Morhevna. We were talking about Tuckmark Emera last night. So Lady Gregory would be one of the popular translations. Yeah, so there's a section there on the Dagda under the Ever Living Ones, page 64. Let's see if there's anything here that's worth just telling. While I'm waiting for Margaret to re-ask the question about the Pleiades, I'm sorry I missed that. See, I don't. Well, maybe if I scroll, I don't. You mentioned them at Slane. The Pleiades. Well, the significance of the Pleiades in relation to the Dowth legend is I think connected with Taurus and the fact that the sun was in Taurus for the vernal equinox in the Neolithic, in the early Neolithic, and that the bull and 7 cows of that story may refer to Taurus, and the fact that at the dawn on the equinox you would see the Pleiades rising due east, and then momentarily after a short time they would be swamped by the growing light of the dawn. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to. And it was at Brew the Dagda, the red man of all knowledge, had his house. And the most noticeable things in it were the hall of the Morrigu, and the bed of the Dagda, and the birthplace of Kermit Honeymouth, and the prison of the grey Macha that was Cuchulainn's horse afterwards. And there was a little hill by the house that was called the comb and the casket of the Dagda's wife, and another that was called the Hill of Dabilla, which I think is fascinating, because Dabilla was the dog that was said to have been with Bowen when she formed the River Boyne after visiting the well of Segish and formed the islands of Rockabill, Cnook, Dabilla. So it is saying that there's a hill at Brunabonia called the Hill of Dabilla. And of course this is from the Dindshanicus, where the Dindshanicus describes all the monuments of Brunabonia and gives them all names. And another that was called the Hill of Dabilla, that was the little hound belonging to Boan. And the valley of the Mata was there, the sea turtle that could suck down a man in armour. And it is likely that Dagda put up his cooking oven there, that Drimna, son of Luchar, made for him at Tara. And it is the way it was. The axle and the wheel were of wood, and the body was iron, and there were twice 9 wheels in its axle, that it might turn the faster. And it was as quick as the quickness of a stream in turning, and there were 3 times 9 spits from it, and 3 times 9 pots, and it used to lie down with the cinders, and to rise to the height of the roof with the flame. The Dagda himself made a great vat at one time for Oinga, his daughter, but she was not well satisfied with it, for it would not stop from dripping while the sea was in flood, though it would not lose a drop during the ebb tide. And she gathered a bundle of twigs to make a new vat for herself, but Gaibla, son of Nuada of the Silver Hand, stole it from her and hurled it away, and in the place where it fell, a beautiful wood grew up that was called Gaibla's Wood. And the Dagda had his household at Brunabonia, and his steward was Dichu, and that's from Altram Chia Gawadar. And Len Fiaclach was the smith of the brew. It was he lived in the lake, making the bright vessels of Fand, daughter of Fleash. And every evening when he left off work, he would make a cast of the anvil eastwards to Indion na Desha, the anvil of the Desha, as far as the grave end. 3 showers it used to cast, a shower of fire and a shower of water, and a shower of precious stones of pure purple. This is interesting. This is supposedly about Dagda, but it's deviating slightly. But Turba, father of Gobnew the smith, used to throw better again, for he would make a cast of his axe from Tullach na Bella, the hill of the axe, and the face of the flood tide, in the face of the flood tide, and this would put his order on the sea, and it would not come over the axe. Interesting, to try to control the tide now. And Corran was the best of the harpers of the household. He was harper to the Dagda's son Dian Kecht. And at one time, see there the way they're saying Dian Kecht is Dagda's son. That's not always the case. And one time he called with his harp to Calcair, one of the swine of Debron, and it ran northward with all the strength of its legs, and the champions of Connacht were following after it with all their strength of running, and their hounds with them, till they got as far as Keshcorran. And they gave it up there, all except Niall, that went on the track of the swine till he found it in the oak wood of Tarba. And then it made away over the plain of E and through a lake. And Niall and his hound were drowned in, following it through the lake. And the Dagda gave Corran a great tract of land for doing his harping so well. But however great a house the Dagda had, Angus got it away from him in the end, through the help of Manannán, son of Lir. For Manannán bade him to ask his father for it through the length of a day and a night, and that he by his art would take away the power of refusing. So Angus asked for the brew, and his father gave it to him for a day and a night. But when he asked for it back again, it is what Angus said, that it had been given to him forever, for the whole of life and time is made up of a day and a night, one following after the other. So when the Dagda heard that, he went away, and his people and his household with him, for Manannán had put an enchantment on them all. And thus we see that despite the fact that Dagda is allegedly the chief of the Tuatha Dé Danann, that Manannán is actually able to work magic over him, so to speak. And when he came back and knew his master was gone, he took service with Angus. And Angus stopped in Brunabonia, and some say he is there to this day, with the hidden walls about him, drinking Gobnew's ale and eating the pigs that never fail. As to the Dagda, he took no revenge, though he had the name of being revengeful and quick in his temper. And some say it was at Chower he made his dwelling place after that. But wherever it was, a great misfortune came on him. It chanced one time Corgan, a great man of Connacht, came to visit him and his wife along with him. And while they were there, Corgan got it in his mind that there was something that was not right going on between his wife and A, one of the three sons of the Dagda. And great jealousy and anger came on him, and he struck at the young man and killed him before his father's face. Everyone thought the Dagda would take Corgan's life then and there in revenge for his son's life, but he would not do that, for he said if his son was guilty, there was no blame to be put on Corgan for doing what he did. So he spared his life for that time, but if he did, Corgan did not gain much by it. For the punishment he put on him was to take the dead body of the young man on his back, and never to lay it down till he would find a stone that would be its very fit in length and breadth, and that would make a gravestone for him. And when he had found that, he could bury him in the nearest hill. So Corgan had no choice but to go, and he set out with his load. But he still had a long way to travel before he could find a stone that would fit. And it is where he found one at last, on the shore of Loch Fiowal. So then he left the body up on the nearest hill, and he went down and raised the stone, and brought it up and dug a grave, and buried the Dagda's son. And it is many an ochon he gave when he was putting the stone over him. And when he had done that, he was spent, and he dropped dead there and then. And the Dagda brought his two builders, Garwan and Imyal, to the place, and he bade them build a rath there around the grave. It was Garvan cut the stones and shaped them, and Imval set them all around the house till the work was finished, and then he closed the top of the house with a slab. And the place was called the Hill of Alyak, that is, the Hill of Sighs, and of a stone, for it was tears of blood the Dagda shed on account of the death of his son. And that is where Lady Gregory finishes talking about Dagda. But again, that's one you should add to your library, and you can get second-hand copies of that. They're very commonplace on the internet. Michelle says, hello from Utah in the USA. Well, hello to you too, and I hope you're having a good evening. So if that is everything, we shall say farewell. We've been on for over an hour now, and it's been a great pleasure, and I'm very glad to have you all along to discuss these ancient stories. I'm learning all the time as I go along. As I said last night, not an academic expert in any of this. I've been enthusiastically reading this stuff for years. I've been making connections, through the threads of mythology for many years now. Still making connections, still reading and finding out finding new revelations and discoveries as I go along, and it's very fascinating. I haven't decided what tomorrow's topic is going to be just yet. I'll make a decision in the coming half day. Subjects to be discussed in the coming week include Bowen. Now, we discussed Bowen tonight, but only in the context of Dagda. She needs a discussion of her own. Queen Maeve, that's potentially a big one. I mean, as the Dagda is. Finn, as in Fionn McCool, we could literally talk about for months, but we will try and condense some aspects of his story. Scota, and she is in Laura Gawala. She's associated with the Milesians, so we'll talk about Scota. Morrigu, we discussed a little bit about Morrigu tonight and her connection with Brew na Bóinne. We'll go more in depth about Morrigu, or the Morrigan, or the Morrigan, during the week. Bridget is another one. St. Patrick and the Snakes. I think we should discuss St. Patrick on Tuesday, on St. Patrick's Day. It would seem to be the ideal time to talk about him. And the Cailleach, another figure of early Irish mythology who we could devote many sessions to. So anyway, there's lots to talk about. I'm looking forward to it all. I'm hoping that all of this is distracting you from the current crisis, and that if you're indoors, it's just giving you something to distract yourselves with. Thankfully, the delivery of books from the internet, from online shops, doesn't seem to be hindered too badly by the current situation. So maybe it's time to go online and find yourself some sources for the Irish myths. Some of the sources we've discussed tonight, maybe perhaps you might dig out your own. And I'd be glad to hear about them if there's information there that I haven't heard about before. Reach out in a comment, send me an email, mythicalireland@gmail.com, and please do tell me what you would like to hear discussed in future episodes. And just before I go, I'm going to just paste the links in. If you wanted to make a donation to Mythical Ireland, you can donate on the website, a one-off donation via PayPal. If you want to become a regular donator, in other words, a patron, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Mythical Ireland. And there are rewards for doing so. So if you pledge $5 a month, you get rewards. You get access to content, blog posts, podcasts, videos, etc. And early and exclusive access. In the meantime, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. It's a great distraction. Margaret says it's not a distraction. Well, yes. It's designed to be a distraction, but I'm glad that you're all enjoying it. Take it handy. Enjoy yourselves. A very good night to you. And if you're working tomorrow, don't work too hard. And we'll see you very soon. Thanks a million. Anthony Murphy, Mythical Ireland, signing out for now. This is episode 4. Episode 5 tomorrow.